Welcome, everyone, to another installment of the World AIDS Museum and Educational Center's Spotlight Series. I'm Raquel Lopes, the Executive Director for the World AIDS Museum, and we're here with Andrew Ruffner, who is Director of Education and Programming. And this week, we are so excited that we get to talk to Therese Frare, who, if you don't know her name, you do know the photography that she did with David Kirby. And so we're going to talk to her about her journey and how she started taking pictures for the school project she did around the AIDS crisis. So Therese, thank you very much for participating in this. And we're so excited to have you on our show today. And like I said, it's a conversation, and we just want to talk to you about how you started and what prompted you to pick the topic of the AIDS crisis when you were looking to do a project at school some time ago. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, this was in 1989 when I started this project, and I was a grad student at Ohio University in visual communications. And I had already worked for newspapers for about a dozen years, and I had chosen to go back to graduate school just to immerse myself some more in photography. And fortunately, I was able to do a project that was of my own choosing. And at that time, of course, AIDS was quite a topic in the news and in the world for so many reasons. And I thought, rather naively, oh, I'll just do a project on AIDS. And then came to find out how difficult that was in terms of getting access or having people being willing to be the subject of that kind of series. So I was in Ohio, Athens, Ohio, which is pretty far south, almost in West Virginia. And I was calling around mostly places in Columbus, Ohio, which was the nearest city, a couple of hours away. And pretty much everyone was like, no. But at the Paternoster House, which was a grassroots organization, the owner, operator, director there, her name was Barb Cordell. She said, well, you can't take pictures here, but you could volunteer. And I thought, well, okay, that's good. I'll do that, because I was, still interested in the topic. And why is kind of hard to answer, but it was just one of those things that I found very intriguing at that time. So I started volunteering at the home, which involved all sorts of things, meals, cleaning up, talking to people, that kind of thing. And I made some friends there. And then Barb decided to allow a TV crew in, because she felt that by being silent, that wasn't really helping them much. And she decided to go public with what they were doing and why. And at that time, she said to me, well, we have a TV crew coming in, so you can go ahead and take photos. So that's how it began.
How did you meet David there? He was there? Yeah.
He was there. He was one of the residents there. They worked with people who had, fallen through the cracks, sort of one way or another. And David had been living in California, and when he came home to Ohio, he was lived in a very small town, and there weren't a lot of services there. And so the connection happened where he ended up in this Paternoster house.
He had, why don't we show the picture for those of you who are unfamiliar? This picture is in Life's 100 photographs. And Why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
Right. Well, this photo happened probably several months after I met David. And let's see how to even begin discussing this. The person on the left-hand side of the image, you can't see, who we're going to talk about later, Peter Church. He was a friend of mine, and I would often, he was a resident and he was a caregiver at the home. He was both, and he was David's caregiver.
You met him there, or did you
met
already
him
know
there? I
Okay.
met him there. And he, I happened to be visiting him one weekend, which was not unusual. And he got the call that David was passing. And he went over to David's unit. Imagine, if you will, they had a house and they had an apartment building next door. They had various places where they were able to work with people, support people through the process. And I went over with Peter because, you know, I was there, and I was in the living room. David was in the bedroom with his family. And David's mother, who's actually not in this picture, that's his sister and his niece, she came to me in the living room where I was and said, "We'd like you to photograph people saying their final goodbyes to David." At this point, I had gotten to know the family, and I guess they just felt that this would be an important part of David's story, although I don't think any of us truly realized what would happen after that. But she invited me in. So just a lot of things coming together at that moment to allow me to be in the place to take this photo.
It's such an iconic photo of that time. You know, just really, it really is a very influential photograph from the 20th century. Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, we really, who were living through that time, we really remember this, even though I don't know how it got disseminated initially. So how did it get out into the world that way? Because, you know, Life magazine published it, I think, but was how did all that go that it got out into the general public?
Yeah, now that's a good question. And I think it's hard to remember what days were like with, you know, film and telephones that were on the wall and sending things through the mail. But literally, that is what happened. I developed the film. You know, I saw there was something there, and I was making some prints of it in the darkroom. And I liked Life magazine. I knew they had a section called Moments that was kind of just one photo of some moment, and they took submissions from the public, and I put this photo in an envelope and sent it to Life magazine Moments section.
Wow.
And they published it. It was called a double truck spread across 2 pages in an issue of their magazine.
Was that unheard of to do a double truck at that time, or was that a normal thing?
The way that section was, there were some photos that would be on 2 pages, some that would be 2 photos on 1 page, some, you know, they did different spreads. So it wasn't unheard of, but it was more play than they would give every photo, for sure.
Wow.
And so for those of people who are watching this and unfamiliar with this iconic picture, we have Peter, who is off on the camera. We have David, we have his sister and his niece, and we have the gentleman here in the black shirt. Can you tell us about him?
Yeah, that's David's dad. That's Bill Kirby.
Uh,
And he, clearly is a very caring
mhm,
man. Um, he's very typical person, maybe for,
mhm,
I think that was one of the things about the image is they were just very typical for,
mhm,
Ohio, for the, America's food basket for middle
mhm.
America, had, just a regular job, regular guy faced with, some tough things happening in his life and doing the very best he could to get through them.
Right. I think that's a really good point. If we remember the time period, and this is not New York City or San Francisco. This is a small town in Ohio. What the difference is in the perceptions, and that this family was very supportive and loving and caring in a time that many families did not show this much love for their sons who were at that time dying of AIDS. You know.
Totally, 100%. And bravery, I would add
Mhm,
to that.
mhm,
Incredibly
mhm.
brave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I know that after it hit Life magazine, that this picture took off and other entities wanted to use it as well. How did it get to Benetton?
Well, yeah. So I think it didn't really take off after that. I think some
Mhm,
people saw it, but the way it got to Benetton was the same story about the post office. I took a print of this photo and I sent it to World Press Photo Competition, which is based in Amsterdam, and they have a premier photojournalism contest every year. And I sent the photo to them as well.
mhm,
And that's another little funny story, but to stay on point, it did win a couple of awards. It was published in their annual book that they published, and that is where Oliveri Toscani, the creative director for Benetton, saw the photo.
mhm.
And he then chose it for this issue-oriented campaign they were doing. So he found it through World Press Photo.
I think I'm trying to remember, is that the next one that we have here?
Yeah.
Right.
No, go back.
Yeah.
So it's a colorized version of the photo. And there was quite a bit of controversy that came up around this. And I'm just, can you talk about that a little bit if people aren't familiar with the story? And I'm curious about your own reactions to that. And, at this point, what are you thinking about the impact of this?
Right. Yeah, it's all rather surreal, but the photo that was in World Press Photo was black and white. And when Benetton contacted me about using this photo, because I, retained copyright to it, I reached out to the Kirby family, and both Mr. Kirby and Bill Kirby and his wife Kay were both like, yeah, let's do it. And that's where the bravery comes in, because I think they had way more bravery than I did. I think I was quite nervous about it, because you're taking an editorial image and using it in advertising. And the backlash against the photograph was that Benetton was using the suffering of people to help them sell their product. And the Kirbys just turned that completely upside down and said, well, we're using Benetton to have this photo seen. all over the world, and it was seen all over the world. It was in billboards, advertisements in major magazines. Some magazines just ran blank pages with a note that they felt the content was too offensive. But even controversy, you get a tremendous amount of press. And I would say for me, it was highly uncomfortable. But the Kirbys are my, rock. I can't say enough about them and how they really rose very bravely to the occasion. And they had just lost, something so precious. And at that time, it wasn't just like a death. It was like watching someone, starve to death, watching someone struggle with breathing for weeks. I mean, it was just such a painful, really even hard to talk about, such a painful thing they had been through. And they just were like, well, what else? Like, we have nothing left to lose, so let's do it.
I find that incredible, the amount of strength that took in the time frame, in the time period that we're talking about, because they're mere words of saying Benetton is not using us, we're using Benetton to get the story out. I think I have chills, because that kind of bravery is something that we should all be able to do in the face of things like this,
Right. I know. And they, David's history is that he had been an activist himself, and they felt it was in keeping with what David would want, which is sort of like personal information you have about your child. So I think they took strength from that. But there were, talk shows in New York City, there were press conferences, there were protests, and, these folks would get on an airplane and, fly off to New York and sit there and have people yell at them, so I don't know how they did it, but they did.
Did any of that come directly your way?
Oh, yes. Lots.
Wow. Yeah.
Well,
for taking the picture or for allowing it to be used
right, for the second. Yeah. Because, imagine, I think now we have a lot more blurring in terms of authentic, real imagery and advertising, but certainly photographic organizations, professional photographic organizations I belong to, felt that, this was not a good thing to do. So yeah, there was some of that too.
Wow.
But, I think it's just, I am so grateful to you for that, because I think this is, this is at the core of what the museum's really about, which our mission is to, decrease the stigma around HIV/AIDS. And I think that this went such a long way, as Raquel was saying earlier about the imagery of a family, from the Midwest, from Ohio, and that type of thing, but just really sort of universalizing an image that we were all aware was happening, but this made it accessible to everybody. For me as a young, I was in college. Well, I was actually in graduate school by that point, but, as a young person, I really wasn't reading Life. So Life probably,
Right.
It was important, but getting it out through United Colors of Benetton to all of these people that, this is what's happening for people, I think that's so powerful. And, there is that whole thing about there's no such thing as bad publicity, but I think this really, I completely remember this advertisement. I remember this whole campaign. And I remember all the controversy then that came up around it.
Mhm, mhm. They were ahead of their time in a way now that we look back on it, but it was almost like using social media before social media existed. It was just, you know, a full press on, you know, billboards and, you know, ads and magazines and posters, and I mean, all over the world. It was really kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have another image that was from before that we want to kind of go onto, that people may not be as familiar with, but wanted you to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So this image was after Barb, the director, said I could take photos there. I kind of went around and said, "Hi, you know, can I take your picture?" And this was actually the first picture I took of David. And I asked him if I could take his picture, and he did, you know, agree. And this is that. I mean, I have to say, sort of beyond this point, you know, within weeks after this point, he wasn't verbal. So I was really pleased with the timing that I you know, did get a chance to talk to him, and he was aware of what, you know, why I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
It's a wonderful
What
thing.
about the other pictures that you have?
Yeah, so we have another set of pictures from another person, so of PETA,
Mhm.
that Life published in their anthology, and those are wonderful as well. So let's set that up a little bit about these other pictures of PETA and what it was like, because those pictures are not only from Paternoster House, but also from other places. So tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, did you want to put up another photo? Oh, yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the Kirby family, they, after their son David passed, they became house parents for the Paternoster home. Once again, you got to think of it in terms of a couple of locations, but they became house parents, and they had, you know, I'm trying to think, maybe four residents there, one of which was PETA, who at that time, once again, you know, roll back to, you know, 1989, 1990, the way AIDS was at that time is you did progress, unfortunately, and many people, you know, did pass on. And so they took care of PETA sort of in a circle of care kind of way, because PETA had been David's caregiver.
Mm.
And this is in the home that they were house parents of.
Mhm.
And that's Kay Kirby. That's the mom, David's mom.
That's really that's another really important story that I think a lot of people can learn from, of dealing with grief, and people finding a way to create something positive out of that, you know, to keep going and to keep, you know, seeing how it's a community of people in that.
Yeah. And also I stayed with the story too. Like, I think people think it was one image, 1 second standing there, but there is so much that happened before and so much that happened after.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think you probably would have gotten that intimacy and that impact if you hadn't had that, you know, it probably would not have
Absolutely.
been there.
Mhm.
So let's go on to another image.
Yeah, this is Kay with PETA. You know, and I'm just noticing right now, I think that's the same photo that was above David's bed, the hands. I just see.
Yeah.
I was looking at that too.
Yeah. I think they that photo stayed with.
Mhm.
But this is Kay, nursing. These aren't professional nurses, right? These are people who figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Mhm. It's miraculous, and especially if we really are looking back in the lens of the time period. HIV and AIDS at that time, people didn't really want to touch it. You don't want to
Absolutely.
be around it. You didn't have, and even within our medical professionals, there was a real big stigma around being around people who had AIDS, and that everyday people like the Kirbys were there to say, okay, tell me what I need to do, and I'll do it.
Yeah, and I think the good point there that you're making is that is why originally the Pater Noster house activities were kept quiet, because no one wanted to live next door to, a makeshift hospice facility for people with AIDS, right?
Right.
No one wanted that. So that was part of it too, definitely.
Absolutely.
So here's
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is Miss Bill Kirby with PETA, as we were talking about doing the famous head bump.
the light in this, Therese, is so incredible with the sun coming through the shades.
Totally, yeah. All of these pictures we're looking at are all natural light. I mean, including the original, famous image. I mean, that image is, poorly lit, underexposed, everything else, but it's not the kind of thing you start, putting up lights or using a flash for, or that kind of thing. So this whole project was just natural light. It's just part of the way it went.
Yeah, I think it's incredible because a lot of times if we look at photography now, and because of the digital aspect of it, you don't get to look at a raw film or use lighting the way in which photographers of the time, and even today, those photographers who like using natural light only, had to work in. There's a limited amount of time in which to be able to take pictures. I'm not a photographer, but I think that might be true. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's true.
Yeah. I like the juxtaposition of the David Kirby picture next to the PETA pictures, because I think they're equally as powerful. And one picture that we won't see is a picture of PETA just diving into water and being near the lake, I think.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I thought that was a wonderful representation of cleansing and purity, so to speak, or at least that's what I took away from it. And that, you in our conversations, you talked about PETA being of indigenous background, and how that played into concepts that people had about who had AIDS and who didn't, or what was the for lack of a better word, the poster person for AIDS at that time.
Right.
That I think did a disservice to all people that were also living with AIDS at that time.
Right. Right.
So we have one more picture of PETA, and then we'll.
Yeah, Raquel, similar to the image of PETA swimming that you talked about, this series on PETA was in between him being a caregiver and him, having more medical complications himself. And I did go with him to South Dakota, and this photo is from a cabin there. His his uncle on his mother's side was a medicine man and, chief mayor of the community. He's Lakota Sioux.
Mhm.
And so I went with PETA there, and we went to, rain dances and a lot of, trying to think that thing when the cleanse when it's really hot, sweat lodges.
Sweat lodges, yeah.
And so it was just, kind of an amazing experience for me. And it was something we were able to do together while PETA was, quite healthy. And this is from that series, the swimming one you were talking about was part of that.
Mhm.
Well.
For those of you who are looking to see these pictures, you can see them, and we'll make sure that the link is available under the video that we show, because they are incredible pictures that really captures the essence of the people's emotions in them. That I think is really, really amazing.
Mhm. And I mean, PETA was really a key part truly of the story, because without him, I wouldn't have been where I was that day. So he's,
Absolutely.
he really is a star of how that image even came to be.
Right. I'm going to we're coming close to the end, but I want to really get your insight of how you see. I know that you've done a lot of varying photography since then, but how do you see this particular period in your photography life, I would say, a journey, as it evolved even today, or even before that, because you were doing this before that, before coming to graduate school, and then you were in graduate school, and then this project was part of it,
Well, I mean, how do I see it as the highlight of my photographic life? It, I think it built on a lot of skills that I already had, fortunately, because I think you had to be a little seasoned to handle the situation that I was in. You don't want to make any of those mistakes that you do as a young photographer, an early photographer. So it built on those skills, and then I think it developed skills that I've used later in my life, certainly in terms of power of collaboration and the power of communication and the and bravery that's sometimes needed in situations that we may not be quite developed yet to deal with, where they are in front of us. When you really or you don't have the skills yet to go there.
I mean, it intense emotionality of the subject matter in itself takes a lot to be able to be present and be caring and communicating at the same time.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I could go on, because there's a whole conversation in the juxtaposition of communication in talking about subject matter. So, I feel like I want to go on, and I realize that we're going to have to find another opportunity to be able really to delve into some of the things that we weren't able to get to. But I'm really appreciative that you took some time to spend with us. And we typically end this by asking the question is that, what do you do for self-care or the off time when you're not,
Oh, hello. You see this
yeah.
here?
That's you? That's yours? Yeah.
Oh, no, I can't take credit for that. That's a photographer friend of mine that's shot from Mount Rainier. And I'm not really a nature photographer, so I'll bow my head to those who do it very well. I love being in the mountains. I love outdoor recreation. I love exercise. Nothing like a good, backpack trip when you're feeling. I'll say what it does is when you realize the great expanse and how small we are, it does really help you to get through the challenges in life, I find. So that's a big thing for me. It's worked very well. Very lucky.
It keeps you centered. It keeps you
Definitely
humble in the massive.
Absolutely.
I did some hiking in the Colorado mountains, and it was humbling to know that you're like this in comparison to everything else. And yeah.
Well,
Wow.
I also want to thank you so much for your work. And, without people who can keep this issue alive as it relates to other issues that we experience, other pandemics, other viruses, other challenges to the, human condition. So I really do appreciate your work, and, definitely takes a lot of people who are willing to, devote their time and energy. So thank you.
Thank you, because as we are dedicated to the story of HIV, you are integral part of that, and we appreciate your time as well. And so, yeah. And so we are unfortunately at the end of our time, but I want to thank everybody for spending the time with us. Therese Frare, thank you, thank you, thank you. It has been quite a pleasure. And so stay tuned to our next installment of the World AIDS Museum's Spotlight series. And we look forward to seeing you then. Have a great night.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.